I need to step back and start again and ask about what's the best way for us, or for me, to be involved in this. How can I play a role? What should it be? And recognizing that it's not a position of control. It's definitely a partnership position.
Keep coming back to the community and to people that I trusted to say, okay, am I doing this right? And then also coming back to my committee members, and Anne was my supervisor, and saying, okay, am I doing this right? So it was a back and forth process to try and figure out, okay, how do I do this properly and in the correct way? And as I mentioned previously, to make sure that I'm following the protocol in both the Indigenous worldview as well as the Western education worldview, so I wasn't breaking protocol in either world. So in La Ronge, they organized a lunch for me, and I thought I was going to have, some grandmothers come and talk to me. So I went there, and they provided the lunch, and food is extremely important, right? And I learned that very quickly. I had already known it, right? But it was just another thing, okay, you have to provide food.
And I strongly encourage setting up ground rules for whatever you do. We'll set up ground rules even for our meetings. So we say, okay, and our ground rule is that you do not talk on top of one another's words, that you finish saying whatever you need to say, and you have that nice pause at the end before somebody else begins to say something else. We rotate the site so that you're not always the one who's on the road. Plus, you learn things about the community that you could never learn by reading a report or anything else. It just doesn't happen.
My dad had told me, don't you write about this stuff, okay? Because it's an oral communication, and your participation inside of ceremonies and those things that we do for ourselves and for our communities are something that are sacred, and that information is everybody's experience, and everyone can receive those gifts of that experiential learning if you are willing to participate. But for me to come and tell you what it is about that participation is something that may not be yours.
Because I'm able to sort of explain to the university people why things have to go this way, or what's happening exactly, and find their language in order to do that. Talk about hermeneutics and talk about social constructivism and how knowledge arises in context, and put it into language that the academics can understand in order to make a space for the research to take place at the community level.
And I told them, well, let's have a ceremony. Let's have a feast. You have to make a statement of intention, what you want. You can't just ask the elders for information and have no one there as a scapios or someone to tell them exactly what you're thinking and translate that so they can translate back to you what's going on. Because asking for someone, you have to be very exact, because my dad used to say, be careful what you pray for. If you ask for rain, you might get a flood. So be careful what you're looking for. You don't know what you're going to get.
Well, I guess the only thing that I could stress is the importance of process, that you can't rush things, and the importance of relationships and listening, and that is not an easy thing for me, the way that I've grown up and the way that I've learned to acquire knowledge, So it's a whole different energy dynamic. So it just reinforces the importance of just listening and being a part of the community, and not trying to control or rush things. So certainly I have to continually learn that as a Western white academic.
If a student comes in Monday morning and says, I went to a sweat on Saturday and I saw my grandfather's face in one of the rocks, you don't reject it because you don't have the experiential base or knowledge base to process that information. What you do, or what we tell our faculty to do, is pursue it, which means that, okay, I don't know very much about this. Why don't we talk about this? Why don't we share this experience? And it's important that we are open to other people's ideas and other approaches, because within Indian society we all develop as individuals, and we all are special, we are unique, and all of you are unique and special, just like the rest of us.
So when I'm talking to health educators with my research findings, I say you have to use the knowledge that the elders already have. So how are you going to work within that issue? If these are their beliefs, what are you going to do? Right? Because you can't discount their beliefs because that's who they are. You have to work within those parameters.
It takes a lot of patience. The research team has to be reflective of the community or communities you're working with. And so it must have elders on it. It must have elders in a capacity that they're not tokens. They are there really, truly guiding that research, praying for what we're doing. And the team has to have Aboriginal members on it, preferably community members, but at least start out with Aboriginal members, people that are connected to their community and can, in fact, go back to their community and say, we're working on this, this is what we're doing, engage them even at that very base level. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of patience, and many researchers are not willing to take that time and have that patience.
And as researchers, when you go into the communities, you must know you just experienced a long silence. That too is to be respected. Get used to it. It's part of our lives and a big part of our lives. Sometimes people will come to visit me and I don't say anything to them. I don't have to. And you don't need to say anything to me. And it's that way with a lot of our people. Because silence is a thing within itself. It's soothing, it's calming, it's healing, it's life itself.
I think that's probably, even though that was a difficulty for me, it was one of the assets that I might have brought to this research team, is knowing that I didn't know, really, theoretically speaking, even just like knowing that, you know, meaning arises in context, that in relationship is where knowledge is formed. And so, of course, this is how the project has to evolve, you know, from a space of sort of nothingness into something that is developed through relationship. So I guess to, you know, new researchers, I guess that would be something that I would just want to point out, that not knowing is an asset.
As he was talking to them, and that's when this horse, this beautiful yellow horse, come running by. And then this little boy held up the stick again, and this time the horse that ran by was a brilliant red. And he kept holding out this stick, and the eagle would come, put food on it, and then he took that stick and he fed coyotes. Again, the coyotes talked to him, he talked to them. And he held up the stick, and the eagle would come and put more food on it. And this beautiful green horse ran by, and he fed those coyotes, and they all talked to him, and he made that coyote sound just exactly like them, and he was laughing. He would do it, and then he'd laugh, and he had this really deep, deep laugh that came from somewhere.
I think for me, as a non-Aboriginal researcher, the most important thing is partnerships, because there are things that we've done as a team, and it's always a team, it's always a collective, it's a partnership. There are things that have happened that I, as a researcher, you know, didn't know or couldn't facilitate. So, you know, the researchers such as yourself, Michael, and you know, Angelina here, and Gerald, and you know, Carrie, Kim, and the elders. I would say as a team, it's a pretty powerful team. So everybody is able to contribute their gifts to the project and make something happen that no one could do alone. So I think learning how to work together as a team, to respect each other, and you know, let each person come forward with their gifts is a big lesson. And certainly listening to the elders and pretty much relying on their wisdom to guide every step of the process is essential, is key, I think, to what we're doing here.
I think it is extremely important that that you work with the people, and I'm a strong believer of including the people from the beginning, so we actually do the work together. I may have some ideas, you know, certainly to start with, but if it actually happens that it's not the way to do it, then I'm willing to kind of reframe or change or readjust the research questions.
One of the things that narrative inquiry also grabbed me was narrative inquiry is a process of collaboration. The researcher is not separate from the process. Both voices need to be heard in the final product.
In order for you to be a true partner in a community-based participatory research design, you must have equivalent money. Okay? You do not volunteer your time for everything. Traditional research uses natives to collect data, and they say, oh, well, therefore they participated, so that's community-based. It's like, no, nice start, but not enough, not enough. And then they'll have natives who are supposed to volunteer to do these different roles, and yet everybody in the research center is on salary. And that is paternalism. Okay? Traditional research is not acceptable to most native communities.
I think in the health sciences, this is especially an important approach because we failed in the health sciences to address those health issues that have strong social determinants. And so if we look at teenage pregnancy or drug and alcohol abuse or teenage suicide, the prevalence of these conditions has actually increased, not decreased, despite our so-called increased knowledge in terms of being able to address these issues. We haven't been able to. And so I think that's because we need a completely different approach. We need a different way of being able to look at these problems and a different way at finding solutions. And so community-based participatory research has allowed us to do that.
Being there, be visible, and that's something we've been trying to work on in the health region, but it's hard because when you have two cultural institutions that are established, we have to find a way to mix the protocol in between, and so sometimes some people from one institution find it harder to direct their skills into another cultural institution. So sometimes they provide us with those jobs, and so the people who really need to be visible sometimes aren't. And this is a good job to try to set up meetings and culturally relevant places so that people can become visible and people actually know names and who people are and what they're working on in the community or working towards.
When you have a culture, you may not see the meaning the same way. So, and then I think that the elders, the notion of respecting, the notion of sharing with them, it was very clear that if you want to work with Aboriginal communities, you have to go there. You have to share their music, to share their songs, to share the way they live. And so that's a way of building your building blocks. It's just about sharing. And that's, I think that's the most important learning experience.
To develop really good community-based participatory projects, that it frequently takes 3 years before you even apply for the grant. That you have time to really visit and get to know one another, and it isn't just that you invite Aboriginal people to come to your setting, but that you make the trek up to where people live. There is no substitution for direct contact. People can describe to you what the roads are like, or what conditions are like, or what their healthcare center looks like, and what's available in their center, what's available in their formulary. And Native people's time is just as valuable as researchers' time or an academician's time. And so it really helps to make a partnership, and a partnership means that you exchange, that you go back and forth on creating that trusting relationship with one another.
I think it's really, really important for people like you and I who are non-Aboriginal researchers and have been in the university community for quite some time to try to use whatever strength we have within that community to essentially change the community. It's always surprising to me that an institution such as a university that's based on research and teaching, which therefore is you're always learning new things and teaching new things, how resistant that institution is to change, and how resistant it is to welcoming other people of different worldview. So I think it's incredibly important for us in our privileged state to work with Aboriginal researchers and to help essentially change the university so it's a much more welcoming place.
I also won't publish until and unless the community wants me to, encourages me to, is part of it. You know, I'll take the lumps in my academic career, but the community comes first. Their needs come first. And frankly, the first questions that are asked when I do approach communities, especially ones that know me, and they're very frank, and they'll say, well, what are the benefits for us? So research has to benefit them. And it might be that the real payoff is a long term down the road, but we also have to do things in the short term that they can feel, touch, see, because we all know that we've been researched to death, and that's what I hear. So it has to be, in order to get them to see the benefits, they have to be able to feel them. And that's what I love about this project, because we produce things that they're involved in, that they direct, that they can see, feel, and touch. And they know that it's going to be beneficial to them.
Is it possible to take elements of the best of something or what's working really well and then build out from there?
It's amazing what has developed, and the development has to do with resources that are put into it, awareness, and training actually people. So I think that's where success comes. What come as well is you need the people from these communities who are going to be interested in doing the research and get the training and go back to the communities.
I do believe these videos are excellent tools because they're non-threatening. These nurses are professionals, and these clinicians are professionals, and doctors are professionals. And the last thing they want is somebody coming in there and saying, this is what you should do. You should do this, right? And in fact, we can't even really say that because we don't have a book that we can go to and just say, here's the list of the do's and don'ts. So these videos, I believe, are effective and they're practical, and they do it in a way that people can take what they need from it, and they're not going to feel that they're threatened or that somebody's talking down to them in any way. Because once that happens, they don't want to make any change.
It's very important for there to be concrete outcomes and deliverables, so to speak, to the community. So the community has the book. They've received education, they're getting teleconferences. So although it takes a long time, I think the feedback loop has to be quite constant, so they begin to recognize that progress is being made.
And that the focus of the study needs to reflect the community's priorities as well as the outside person's. So sometimes we've had people who have approached us and they said, we want to do this study. And I said, well, that's nice, but it's not going to fly in our community. I said, you have to get the elders to tell you what they want first and see how you can make it mesh. And sure enough, a lot of times we can make things mesh so that it becomes a win-win situation. And that's what we're looking for. The academicians, the people in research settings, they need to publish. So do Native communities. They need to publish.
I guess one of the things that sometimes comes up is intellectual property rights. And or who owns that research. And it's important that the community owns that research for it to do, because it's their information.
In terms of dissemination of results, knowledge translation, or getting back to communities, I think you have been very creative. You know, the DVDs and, you know, the theater. I know I've seen Rose present, you know, the stories, the composite stories. It's absolutely powerful, you know, and it speaks to communities, you know, obviously Indian communities, but also to non-Indian communities, and it's has kind of moved and, you know, kind of grabbed people by their, you know, in their hearts. Yeah.
Because my funders said, well, you know, your results look really good, but if it were that good, you would have published a paper on it. And because you didn't publish a paper on it, we won't refund it. And so this was a facility back in 1975. It was one of the very first violence protection types of programs that were out there. And so it crashed and burned. And then I talked to some of my elders, and I said, well, why aren't there more Native writers? And he looked at me and he says, oh, and how many articles have you written? Thank you, grandfather. And I said, okay. And that's the same message I give to people now. As I said, it is not a pleasant experience to write. It is a very frightening experience to write. But you must write. We need more Native people writing, as well as we need the academicians and the researchers partnering with Native people and writing articles together. You will have a much richer article and a much richer perspective of what happens with this.
The lesson I take away from that is just another example or a reinforcement of having something tangible or practical that people can focus on and that they can then use within their communities as a way or a vehicle for helping to build that trust and build those relationships and build that understanding.
And then the findings must first be disseminated to the community in easy to understand language, not with a lot of jargon. Right now on the website, if you Google Native American Cancer, ours is the first organization that comes up. If you do Native American Cancer Research, we're the first organization that comes up. We have 1,200 visitors and 8,500 hits a day on our website. So for a little 8-person community-based nonprofit organization, it's phenomenally successful. It is very, very, very highly used.
I was on APT and Contact talking about cancer in First Nations communities. The production of a DVD of the drama presentations in both Cree and English, that is done. So that will be going back to the communities for reporting back. And then I had talked to NBC Radio to kind of present radio snippets of cancer prevention and awareness, but that's still in the process.
He held up the stick and the eagle came and he put food on the stick and he took that stick and there was 5 beaver and they swam up to the shore and he held out that stick and he fed them and they turned and they swam away, and as they did, they slapped the water with their tails. And as they slapped the water, making that sound, that sharp crack sound, he did the same thing with the stick, made the same noise, and this beautiful purple horse went by. And the little boy went and held the stick up, and the eagle came, put food on it, and the little boy turned around, and he faced me, and he pointed the stick at me, and that's the first time I saw his face, and I looked at him, and I looked at his eyes, and I looked down at his little hands holding that stick, and I looked up, and I was no longer looking at the little boy. I was looking at Elder Ken Goodwill, and he had a pipe in his hand. And then the little brown filly went by, and I followed her out of my dream.
Any First Nations community, there are things that you know that they don't want to share, and it's not because, well, it may be because they mistrust you, but one of the things about going to college and whatever is developing trust within the community. And that it's an indication that you believe or you honor and respect the people within the community.
As we all know, Aboriginal people have been discriminated against and oppressed by many of our forefathers